All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another editions of Rogue Mornings. Again, very excited today to be joined by London Paul to help break down all the news, all the information. I want to thank everyone for their patience. I know we ran a little bit late today, was having a little bit of a technical difficulty with one of the streams getting started. Yes, V's still on vacation. Everything's okay with them. I know that there were some conspiracy theorists out there were thinking that the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton cabal, finally caught up with V, but that is not true at all. So we can wipe those conspiracy theorists away. V will be back. Hopefully tomorrow. I'm not sure if he'll need one more day rest coming back from his vacation. Sometimes we need that whenever we're traveling with families. Before we kick off today's show, I just want to again thank our sponsors, myfreedomnow.us. And again, if you are in the help of needing to credit repair, you're needing to get a loan to establish, you maybe refinance your home, refinance an automobile, get a lower interest rate, myfreedomnow.us, and also mygoldusb.com. Which I'm realizing that I have not ordered mine yet, that I need to do so. Primarily if I'm going to be switching off of all this Google stuff. I'm going to need my own operating system that's portable so that way I can use it wherever I go with military grade encryption, ability to put my paper wallet on there to have it portable. And again, mygoldusb.com. So Paul, how are you today?
Well, I'm very well, and how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm on my second cup of coffee. I have a bottled water here. I'm fired up. It's it's an amazing time to be alive right now and witnessing everything that's happening right now, not only here domestically but geopolitically as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Every day there's just enormous amounts of things going on. It's getting hard to decipher what's more important than other things. There's spells in the past where we might get a few days where it was pretty quiet, but now it's every day. There's plenty of things to talk about, and which makes it great for us doing shows like this, of course.
Yes, we will always have news to cover. Before we jump into some of the topics that we kind of mapped out, I want to talk about yesterday. I shared with you a little bit before we went live that I do watch the MSM. I do channel surf to watch some of the Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. I always listen to it because I have to understand their talking points, to understand the fake narratives that they're wanting to build, and then primarily to be able to counter that, and then also educate our listeners, educate the new media in terms of what the propaganda is, the propagandists of the cabal, the deep state. And yesterday they had it on full throttle yesterday, Paul, just kicking up this fear mongering, the war mongering, the nuclear attack that's imminent, all these things. What say you, Paul?
Yeah, of course. And you touched upon the fact that a Russian surveillance plane flew over US airspace around Washington. And it was this, I mean, the headlines kind of inferred almost as though this Russian plane had snuck under the radar
Yeah.
and might launch some kind of crazy attack in Washington. But of course, it's a prearranged flight that's made through this Treaty on Open Skies agreement, which exists between Russia, the US, and over 30 nations. And what it does is it allows countries to make unarmed observation flights over the soil of other treaty members to promote, in inverted commas, transparency and kind of international armed control efforts, which is absolutely fine. But of course, the narrative was scaring the hell out of people. And then at the end going, well, actually, this is just routine flying. We do it over Moscow, they do it over Washington, no big deal. But it's part of feeding that frenzy of scaring people. Everything Russian related is something to be frightened of. I mean, I've had it in the past with people saying to me, well, if you go to Russia, it's really dangerous, you don't want to go there. And it's just this kind of general fear that exists in relation to everything related to Russia. So, of course, they'll spin any narrative. But there was nothing to the story. As I commented to someone, the only time you'd have any concern was if they decided to bomb Washington. I mean, joking, of course, because it's just not reality. But that's the kind of level of hysteria that it's got to. And And I know increasingly numbers of people in the US and obviously the UK and elsewhere are waking up to this, but there's still a significant proportion of people who do buy the sort of Russophobic kind of attitude to everything.
You're absolutely correct. And you know what it reminds me of, Paul? It distinctively reminds me of the post 9/11 fear mongering regarding the terror threat level. The terror threat level today is orange. These are the four colors. So when it's red, you need to run into your bunker. And like Vio was used to say, grab your cat food and get ready to
Yeah.
to be bunkered down. That's what it reminded me of yesterday, was just overwhelmingly response in the media to continue this fear mongering. And in fact, I know I caught a headline and I just scrolled through it, that one of the hosts, specifically, they were in a roundtable forum, basically said that it's the media's job right now to scare the hell out of people, to make them scared, to make them afraid. And that's what we're witnessing right now. And unfortunately, I'm very active, involved in social media, and unfortunately, a lot of Americans are buying into the rhetoric right now regarding North Korea.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about North Korea in some detail yesterday, and unsurprisingly, all the high octane rhetoric gets diffused, and Tillerson calms everyone down, and then the following day it's all kind of forgotten. So, and well, largely anyway. And this is the thing; it's becoming what I call yesterday's chip shop paper, and it just gets discarded. But it's going to increasingly happen, and at every opportunity to stoke up the rhetoric regarding Russia. But of course, the basis of it all was that the Democrats and Clinton lost the election. So, in order to deflect the microscope away from them, they went and sort of banged on about this whole Russian electoral interference in the US, and of course it just gathered momentum. And now we have countless investigations going on, which have unearthed absolutely nothing. Huge taxpayer expense in the process for no purpose other than just to keep feeding this frenzy that. But eventually, at some point, the whole thing is just going to fall flat on its face. And as much as we see these stories surface periodically or more than periodically, and one day it's all just going to die a death and no one's going to talk about it anymore. And someone's going to stand and go, hang on a minute, what really was that whole Russophobic angle about? And then, of course, there will be a whole different side to the argument that will come to the fore. But yeah, it's like anything. If people want to choose to take, stock of what's said, fine, that's up to them. But it is just nonsensical fear mongering, and it's just part of the thing, as we said, and it's an old propaganda trick that if you say something enough times, people just believe it, and it becomes an established fact. And of course, that's the classic Nazi propaganda that they admitted they used after the obviously the Nazi regime collapsed. That's precisely what they did. It was this angle of, well, if you keep repeating things, people believe it. And of course they did. And of course, subsequently after the war, at some point, then the whole rhetoric fell apart, and the German people realized what the reality was, which was very, very different.
Correct. Yes, yes. And it's interesting you said that in regards to the media, the far left, the fact that, Trump won the election, and here we are, 9 months, almost nearly 9 months out, and we continue to see them push this narrative. Now, I want to change things up a little bit, because there's some things happening around the globe that I think that we need to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And let's jump forward. Let's jump forward a little bit, primarily in regards to Israel. And we know that prior to the election in Israel, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was basically, he won his election, but we did witness Obama, the cabal, perhaps the deep state, pouring millions into that election, trying to undermine his efforts for re-election. And now he's under a power struggle himself in Israel. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I know someone who actually lives in Israel who was talking to me about this probably back almost a year ago. That there was a lot of talk at that point of investigations into Netanyahu and obviously his government. And he's obviously there's on these ongoing corruption investigations, and there's a lot of speculation that he could, be forced to resign. I think it's highly unlikely. And interestingly, of course, the police have also questioned his wife over this alleged misuse of funds. And that apparently there's all these every week or every month, oh, the Attorney General is going to indict her, but it never kind of quite happens. And a lot of this can be just done, again, media speculation. Yes, there is investigations and they're ongoing and they have been for a considerable period of time and they seem to get deeper and deeper and deeper. But whether anything in reality comes to pass and Netanyahu, if it's legitimate, faces charges, and I don't know what the equivalent of impeachment is in Israel, but is forced to resign and step down. It's difficult to ascertain whether that will ever become a reality. But what I can say to you is, yes, he is, despite him being re-elected, he is very deeply unpopular in Israel amongst many of the people who want to see changes, want to see better integration with nations in the Middle East who really do want to see a solution to the whole Palestine question. I mean, a lot of people might not believe that, but that's a reality. Got to bear in mind, once again, as much as we talk about the media angle in terms of people's perspective on what goes on in Russia, or you also have to look in terms of Israel, that most people in Israel don't want anything to do with the nonsense that goes on. They don't want anything to do with what the problems and that are associated with Palestine. They just want peace with neighbors and to resolve problems and have a two-state solution. Now, as I say, whether anything comes of this, it's debatable because, as I say, it's been dragging on for a very long time, and it periodically makes headlines in the news, and everyone thinks that, that something's going to come to pass in this regard. But, will something come about? I'm not entirely sure. I mean, Netanyahu, of course, is denying any wrongdoing and saying that he's completely innocent, and of course, he's deflecting some of the scrutiny and the criticism by accusing Palestinian officials kind of somehow behind it because they want his demise, and obviously it then kind of reverts back to the whole Palestinian question of a two-state solution, which China and Russia are very heavily pushing for. And as I've said before, and it remains the case, Netanyahu is largely on a leash with respect to the Russians and Putin, and increasingly is having to become economically dependent and reliant on China. So he's under a lot of external pressure as well as the internal pressure.
Yeah, just reading through, it looks like there's primarily what's listed in this potential article is two charges. One involves Netanyahu and his family members receiving gifts on a regular basis from two businessmen. Israeli media have reported that the gifts included cigars and champagne. Those could just be friendly gestures of exchange. Case 2000 involves a deal Netanyahu allegedly discussed with the owner of one of Israel's largest newspapers, Sheldon Adelson, U.S. casino mogul. I've known that name before and seen it other places. You would think that there could primarily be some discussions in regards to perhaps maybe Israel's involvement, in Syria, some other things that if the media and the news agencies, really wanted to put forth different efforts in regards to, Netanyahu and some of their foreign policies that they've implemented under him. But it's just interesting to see that, he's lashing out against the left and the media, holding similar to these rallies that Trump is as well. Do you happen to know, Paul, any insights in the event that, not saying it's going to happen, but if there is a transfer of power, who's waiting, or what would be the next steps for Israel?
I couldn't say who is likely to take over. I don't know how the Israeli political system works. I mean, in the UK, for example, if a leader resigns or leaves, like what happened with people like David Cameron, then there wasn't an election. Theresa May just took over, and that was that. And okay, she subsequently, kind of won in the last election, obviously, but not with an overall majority. But I don't know how the political system works. I think the opposition see it as an opportunity to perhaps broker a change in sort of Israeli foreign policy as well as domestic policy. Whether that comes to pass is another matter, because I think what you're seeing as well is, and these rallies, it's another great example of a leader who knows they're under serious pressure. They know they're not getting the leverage in terms of foreign policy. There's no doubt, despite Trump's meeting with Netanyahu and the idea we're all great friends, you're not seeing that the US have been very supportive of Israel in any respect whatsoever. So I think that was largely just window dressing to convince Netanyahu that it was business as usual. I don't see it like that. I think the US attitude towards Israel has changed markedly, and Israel's been largely very mute about everything in the Middle East. They've not, yeah, they've had one or two skirmishes into Syria, which they shouldn't have done, but largely they've said nothing. They've been pretty quiet about Qatar. I mean, they're just not getting involved and saying an awful lot. And I think Netanyahu's got enough problems at home to deal with, and hence, yeah, these kind of rallies to try and convince people of that he has support and that his approval ratings are solid, which actually they're probably not, because they're probably rigged. But I know from the person I spoke to that he's not popular in the country, and but there's not a huge degree of confidence that there is any mechanism to remove him. And when you look at the charges, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, they're pretty tame in political circles. And I mean, and as you said, the cases that you're listing, there are grounds to say, well, hang on, okay, so receive gifts. What does that actually mean, and what's the context of it? And of course, the suggestion that they discussed with owners of Israel's newspapers for this idea of having better coverage in return for like putting curbs on the competitors in the newspaper industry. I mean, it's very kind of I mean, how easy is it to prove that? And really, in reality, you see newspapers in the UK that are very pro-conservative, pro-Labour. I mean, I'm sure in the US, equally you have newspapers that are more pro-Democrat or more pro-Republican, and the question is how much involvement do political parties have in influencing those processes? Well, to a larger or lesser extent, it's quite commonplace. So I think the charges themselves, of all the things that you could leverage at Netanyahu, they're pretty tame, and that's why. Again, it's a lot of it sounds like great high octane rhetoric that, he could be forced to resign. But the fact this has been going on as long as it has, and we don't seem to have had any real progress, doesn't suggest to me that it's likely to happen. And anyway, I think as much as weak he is politically, I don't think anyone's going to have the gumption to or the stomach to actually pursue this and look to press charges and make him resign. But you can never say never. But thus far, there's no real indication that that's a likely, scenario.
Yeah, great insights, and you bring up a very valid point in regards to Qatar and watching Israel's positioning and stance with their Saudi alliance, and primarily that was built around their distaste, their hatred for Iran. But with now China and Russia, coming in and probably having more influence geopolitically in that region potentially than the United States, it's going to be interesting to see where this goes and what particular Israel does in regards to their foreign policy, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the primary focal point remains, sorry, excuse me, with Iran particularly. I mean, that's always seems to have been, and there's still the kind of mutterings coming out of, or less so, it's kind of muted out the Trump administration with regards to Iran now, and they seem to have largely backed away from that narrative, but not entirely, because of course they're wrapped up in these Russian, North Korean, and Iranian sanctions. But from an Iranian perspective, it's a pretty mute impact as opposed to Russia. So I think that's probably primarily where we need to look. I mean, less so with regard. I mean, yeah, relations between Saudi and Israel. And there's always a lot of, or a lack of clarity as to exactly what those relations are. Yeah, there's a lot of speculation. I mean, they're far from enemies by any stretch of the imagination, even though a lot of people's perspective wouldn't see how those two had anything in common. But of course, we know they do. And but I think Saudi Arabia's got its own problems to worry about just internally, and as well as this debacle with Qatar and fighting this insane war in Yemen. So they're far too preoccupied to be worrying about relations with Israel at this point in time. So I think it's just part of this huge change that's coming about globally. I mean, we're seeing big changes in the Far East, we're seeing huge changes in the Middle East, and consequently, in a sense, you're starting to see the isolation of nations who at one time were the focal point of Middle Eastern policy to a large extent, and I don't think Israel's falling into that category. But ultimately, of course, it will change, and the Netanyahus of this world won't be in power in Israel, and the whole Israel kind of attitude towards Palestine is going to change and shift. Whether it's just through different leadership who are very amenable to such changes, or there's Netanyahu stays and political pressure so intense that he's forced and backed into a resolution, because clearly there has to be a resolution to the issues in Palestine, and actually also there needs to be a resolution within Palestine as to the leadership there and what their real intentions are with regards to Palestine too, because I think sometimes it's questionable behaviour as to for their own leadership, and how are they serving the best interests of the Palestinian people.
Absolutely. Very, very well said. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about something that's not discussed a whole lot right now in terms of the new media, and that's China threatening India with war as a border dispute continues. Paul, what in the world is going on here?
Well, I've kind of known about this for a while and not really covered it in the podcast because, once again, it's kind of largely a bit of hot air rhetoric. I mean, I've covered aspects off to do with India and their relationship, but the actual dispute concerns, it's always these regions, a bit like between India and Pakistan, you have Kashmir, and there's always this dispute. Now, there's a land dispute between China and India, which is called, let me remember what it is, because I always get this mixed up with something else. It's called the Dockland region. Now, what
Yes, you're
this
correct.
is, yeah.
The only reason I know that's because I have the article brought up. That's the
Yeah,
only reason I know, Paul.
couldn't think of it for a minute. So India's kind of opposed to this Chinese plan. There's this idea to extend this border through this disputed territory between Bhutan and China. And China claims it's part of their country, and Bhutan's saying it's their region. And of course, what I do know is India and Bhutan have these strong relations. So in a sense, it's become this face-off where the Indians have got involved. And there's all this other idea there's going to be a war between them. I just don't see it. Yeah, I mean, the Indians are being highly provocative in some of the actions they're actually, well, committing inside Chinese territory from the Chinese perspective. But there's a bigger kind of backstory to this with India, where they're trying to kind of have what I refer to as have their cake and eat it, in the sense that they're kind of trying to sort of embrace the One Belt, One Road because they see China as a viable partner, but also they're kind of trying to also face that off against maintaining relations with Washington. So there's this kind of tension that still exists between the two countries, and in one sense they're embracing the One Belt, One Road 1 minute, and then go, well, actually, no, we're not going to embrace it, and we might form our own One Belt, One Road, and through India and Afghanistan and nations like that, which is in stark contrast. They can't seem to make up their mind geopolitically what they want to do. Now, I'm not advocating anyone has to take sides, because that's nonsensical. But in the process, they're kind of having these spats with nations like China, and this border dispute is kind of, in some senses, a bit ridiculous. I mean, yeah, China's kind of warning them not to underestimate the force they may use and the restraint they may apply, but they kind of see India's actions as just, I mean, utterly crass and actually very ignorant, and in some senses, I think they see it as audacious behaviour for them to come in and go, well, how dare you kind of invade our sovereign territory, and okay, there are arguments to and for regarding what is actually going on in reality to this area, but I think at the moment I wouldn't frame it as being something particularly concerning. I mean, it's been going on for quite a while already, a number of weeks, and there's a lot of stories, and it's hard to substantiate situation. But of course, in the broader sense, India needs to realize as well, it's just joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization along with
Yeah.
Pakistan. And this is where the contradiction comes in. I mean, they want to increase trade with China as well. And yeah, of course they do. And they joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but they're already having problems with that because Pakistan joined at the same time, even though they knew Pakistan was going to join. And so there's all these historical disputes between India and Pakistan. Now they're having a go with India and China, but of course they have a huge border that extends thousands of miles. But there has been historical problems between the nations, and you know, I don't think it'll ever come to war. But it's damaging for India's relations with China in the exactly at the time that they're supposed to be more cooperative through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the One Belt One Road initiative. And let's be honest, India's beautifully placed to take advantage of exactly that. And of course, Pakistan already have in terms of strengthening relations with China and Russia. But it's the fact that also Pakistan's taken, this initiative to form stronger relations with China that's actually upset India, because they're going, well, you're forming relations with Pakistan, who we have disagreements with, as though you can't in fact be mature and have relations with both nations. And that's kind of, I think, partly why it's inflamed this border controversy between the two countries.
Yeah, it's very interesting, to watch it, and in particular, who is guiding Modi, who is influencing Modi with some of these actions. If you take a look at the past year in regards to the recall of the large denomination of the 100, the 50s, the perhaps the move to the cashless society, all these things that Modi has been involved with, and I'm with you. I think this whole dispute with China is perhaps a distraction, maybe a planned distraction for China, perhaps at some other influence. Maybe India is taking another step. Maybe they think it's one belt, one road, one land. I don't know. Maybe they're taking it to the next level. But it's just interesting to see Modi and his actions and the things that he does in particular with them. It's almost like he is under some other influence, some other control that's kind of guiding his actions and what he does on the geopolitical stage.
Well, I think there's a lot of inference of some sort of Kabbalist influence on Modi in India. I mean, the whole cashless society thing was actually ironically not the case, because they just phased out old banknotes and bought in new ones. So they were actually just replaced like for like, effectively. It wasn't a drive to a cashless society. Yes, it was a very stupid thing to do overnight, and it caused a lot of damage to the Indian economy and a lot of disruption. So in that sense, I don't have particular concerns about that. But some of his, I mean, you saw when he met up with Trump, he was kind of like all over Trump, like leaders of yesteryear would with American leaders, and trying to, oh, we want to form ties and relations. And I think they're just trying to have their cake and eat it. And as a consequence, it's just a very, very damaging kind of relationship to have, because in essence, they're going to play nations off against each other. And you just don't start doing that with, as weak as the US is currently, and particularly with China. They need to just realize, look, we're going to have dispute. We've got to settle disputes with neighbors like Pakistan. We're part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We need to work together. Yes, Pakistan's going to get trade and freight through maritime routes, and we will also benefit as well. And we're quite capable of doing. We don't need to go on our own and try to show the world or show the Americans that we're not actually interested in the One Belt One Road. Just embrace it and start to tone down the rhetoric, and don't get involved in border disputes with China, because it's absolutely counterproductive and rather pointless. But you do kind of wonder the motivation behind it, because they know full well that it's not a sensible decision to make. And I think it's the part of the Indian administration that's swinging towards the Americans, and it kind of can be almost like I'm trying to suggest to the Americans, look, we're quite strong, and we're going to fight back against China. We're not going to take things lying down with the Chinese, and it's just trying to play one off against each other, or trying to have their cake and eat it, and it's ultimately not going to work. And India has economic problems and issues of its own that it needs to address. So getting into pointless spats with the Chinese over a border dispute.
Right. Correct. All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit around gold. It seems like lately most conversation is dominated regarding the cryptos and the blockchain and all that. But let's talk about gold, Paul, in regards to its utilization, the future of it. What do you see happening with the metals with gold?
Right. Well, what I would say is, and with regards to cryptocurrencies and gold and silver, you don't, there's this emphasis almost that people have to be in divided camps. You have to be one or the other. Well, actually, no, you can be perfectly be in both, and there's no reason not to be. There's a lot of debate about the future of cryptocurrencies. What I will say, and I'm quite happy to say this, is that currently we're kind of in this phase where it's like the early days of the internet. That's where cryptocurrencies are as an analogy. And there are going to be subsequent iterations between, the second, third, fourth, fifth generations. And they're going to be radically different. I think there's probably a lot of existing coins that won't survive in the future. And I'm not saying everyone won't, but I definitely the move in Russia and China is to go to gold backed cryptocurrencies that are going to be decentralized. They want to iron all the wrinkles out, and there are wrinkles in currently in cryptocurrencies. There's no doubt about that. I mean, you only have to look, and I've spoken about this on several occasions previously about price manipulation of Bitcoin, and without a doubt, somebody somewhere is manipulating the price. Now, whilst it's going upwards, everyone's going to be very happy about that and not being particularly bothered. But if you have manipulation downwards, then people will start to get annoyed and angry about it. There's no doubt someone is manipulating the price. That is of concern. It is extremely volatile and it doesn't have great liquidity. So there are teething problems. The long-term prognosis, cryptocurrencies are here to stay and they have a big future. And Russia and China believe that, and they're far more advanced in terms of where they're up to and what they're doing currently with respect to that space. Now, in terms of gold, well, they want to have gold-backed cryptocurrencies. The future, from what I understand, is asset-backed cryptocurrencies. There'll be people out there who'll vehemently disagree with me, and other people will agree with me. I'm not saying, and from my perspective, it makes complete sense, but that's the reality. That's where they're aiming for. Whether people like it or not, that's where Russia and China are going with it. And I think they'll become more dominant players in the cryptocurrency space going forward. But in terms of gold, well, here's the question. Why, if, gold, people, there's, historically the cabal have called it a barbarous relic. People seem to think now that perhaps the death of fiat currency, and we're going to see the rise of cryptocurrencies and gold and silver having irrelevance. Well, historically, for a period of about 3 years, 1,000 tons of gold went east every month via London, which was resmelted in Switzerland to the east. China's dumped dollars, euros, yen, and sterling to buy gold. The other currencies in the SDR basket. That shows how much they regard the SDR basket as having any relevance. A huge amount of gold's trading under the table in Asia. Then all the bullion, Western bullion exchanges combined, there's still huge amounts of gold heading east, and the gold will continue to head east. And silver, for that matter. China's started to buy a lot of silver, as have other nations. So it's not just gold, it is silver as well. And at some point, there's always been this much vaunted arbitrage whereby, because the Shanghai Gold Exchange can reprice gold and make it significantly higher, the arbitrage would be, well, if I can buy gold cheap in the West, I'm going to sell it to the East, and I'll make a profit. And in the process, more gold heads from West to East. Now that hasn't really happened. We've seen sometimes $30, $40 difference in price, but nothing any significance. And why? Because the East can continue to buy gold at a cheap price themselves. So why would they bother? The arbitrage is not going to happen until the West has no more gold. Now, there's a lot of arguments about gold holdings and how much gold nations have. Uh, from my understanding, the US has no gold. I mean, the 8,000 tons in Fort Knox is a couple of barrels with a few kilo bars in it. There's no actual reality to the US having any gold. The question is, where did that gold go? Well, there's a big story in itself, but we could talk for hours about that. So arguably the West, I mean, gold keeps going. I think recently the US sold a lot of gold that it produces. Where did it go to? China, no surprise. China and Russia's citizens have been advised to buy gold. I mean, we said the other day, you know, over 10,000 tons of gold has been bought up since 2000. I think it was 12,000 tons or more since 2008 by the Chinese people. And there, the Russians are encouraging people to buy gold. The Shanghai Gold Exchange is very, very different from the COMEX and the LBMA, principally because if you and I buy an ounce of gold, it's backed by an ounce of gold. Paper markets in the West are not backed by gold, as we know. And the Shanghai Gold Exchange is launched an English language website version. Why? Because it's now the world's largest physical gold market. They want people to bypass London, the COMEX in London because of its paper gold trading effectively. And secondly, they don't want to expand and internationalize the yuan in gold trade. Only recently, and this is what keeps happening. China's bought up 230 tons of gold from the Perth Mint in Australia, and that compares to 100 tons in 2011. And this is what it's like everywhere you go around the world. China's buying up every bit of gold you can get from Australia, from the Middle East, from Europe, from the US, and Russia's doing the same. And they do both have around 40,000 tons of gold each. Now, here's the question. If gold had no future, why would they be doing this? I mean, it's self-explanatory. They're buying it because it's all geared around to have, the gold standard and gold-backed currencies or asset-backed currencies. I mean, Mexico may go with silver because obviously has huge silver reserve. Now, people will say, well, there's no place for gold standard. There is, but we never had a proper gold standard. There used to be a quasi-gold standard. If you have a proper gold standard, it will have a future and it will redefine sound money. And I think the problem is that for me, there's a perspective that, well, cryptocurrencies is all decentralization. It's the end of governments. It's the end of this. It's the end of that. Well, okay, fine. Well, if you think that's the end of how the world operates, here's a question. Who's going to pay to light your streets? Who's going to pay? Effectively, people hate taxes, but taxes, if they are spent properly, are paid for a reason, to provide services, to build infrastructure, to provide services in a country. How are people going to be paid in a world that doesn't have these currencies and it's just cryptocurrency based? Bearing in mind the volatility, imagine if just plucking a figure out of the air, it doesn't mean anything, but someone said, oh, I'm paid 2 Bitcoins a month. That covers effectively my salary. And then a month later or 2 months later, it's worth a fraction of it because of the price of Bitcoin, because of the volatility. It's not a practical realization. Yes, it's going to have huge impact in the financial world. It will have a huge impact in global trade, and it's going to make a huge mark in the world. But the idea that it kind of replaces a traditional financial system at this point in time is just not realistic. Once again, it's that how do you phase one thing out? You can't just stop everything and go, well, everyone just embraces cryptocurrencies and we're all going to have our wallets and trade accordingly. How does that work? I mean, yes, there is some uptake in businesses taking payment for Bitcoin, but it's slow. It's not as advanced as people might want to believe or think it is. But yes, it's making strides forward. And then the big question is, everyone says, well, when the financial system crashes and collapses, cryptocurrencies will take over. Well, I'm sorry to say, but if the financial systems collapse, the world and the internet goes dark. If the internet goes dark, how's anyone going to trade cryptocurrencies? You can't. It's impossible.
Right.
And therefore, we have to balance the fact that gold and silver do have a big future. I think the differential in the price between gold and silver is going to narrow. People will argue that gold has no kind of industrial application. We can talk about something. Lisa wrote an article which we can reference to shortly. But there is a demand for gold. There always has been, and there always will be. And there will always be a demand for silver. Yes, there's industrial applications, but also as a metal, just not in terms of for investment purposes. It doesn't mean that they have to be in competition. We can have gold and we can have silver and we will have cryptocurrencies, and they will all coexist in a world fulfilling different functions. And that's how I see it. I don't see this idea that suddenly We have to switch tack and go, well, I believed in gold and silver and now I don't believe in it anymore. Now I just believe in cryptocurrencies, and never the twain shall meet. But from the Chinese and Russian perspective, they're going to have asset backed cryptocurrencies. Gold backed is what's supposed to happen. And that is the future. That's where they see it, and that's where the strength is. The problem we have currently, there are people out there who are talking about having asset backed cryptocurrencies and centralizing them. Now, a centralized approach, yes, is not the way forward. And people say, well, how's China and Russia going to have a decentralized gold-backed cryptocurrencies? Well, watch, because it's going to happen, and that is their mantra. That is what they're going to do, and I'm not going to bet against them achieving those objectives. And that will propel cryptocurrencies forward in a huge way. It will have far more global kind of uptake, far more global interest, and it will kind of propel in via this second and third generation cryptocurrency, where they will have huge industrial application, huge financial application. And let's face it, blockchain technology is absolutely superb. It is brilliant, and it will have many, many such applications going forward. So I'm very bullish. I'm not saying I'm bullish about buying cryptocurrencies now. I'm not saying people shouldn't do it. I'm not offering investment advice. I'm just very reluctant because of the sheer volatility. But I'm interested in cryptocurrencies. I'm actually involved working in a very small way as part of a bigger initiative for looking into something to do with cryptocurrencies. I am very interested in asset-backed ones in the future, and at some point, yes, I probably will invest in things, and because I see it has a very bright future. But I'm not keen on this idea we see at the moment that there's people on the gold and silver side going, no, I just can't embrace cryptocurrencies, and then vice versa. There's people on cryptocurrencies going, there's no future for gold and silver. It just doesn't make any sense, and it never works out that way. And in the future, China and Russia are going to have gold-backed currencies, the yuan and ruble. I mean, possibly Russia may form a currency alliance, but it's still going to be gold-backed. They're setting, so that's why they've all bought 40,000 tons of gold each to back their currencies. They didn't buy it because they like the color of the metal.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I completely agree, and that's an important message. Is that you don't have to decide which camp, which side you're on. There is going to be something I've said numerous times is that there is space for both, and it's just a very exciting time to be observing this, to be watching it. Paul, I feel bad yesterday when we closed out the show. I did not even give you time to plug your work. So before I
Oh
forget, I'm
no,
going to go. Before I
don't
forget, I'm going
worry.
to go.
No, it
I
doesn't
get to the
matter.
show
No,
and I'm like, okay, fine. Yeah.
no, it's fine. I think most people who listen know, but obviously, maybe they don't. Yeah, but no, we appreciate and thank you for doing so. Well, obviously, I'm not going to go into too much detail. We have the seriousreport.com, SIRIUS. We have the Twitter page at the Serious Report. We have the Facebook page, which is just the Serious Report. And yes, we have our podcast subscription service, which is $4.75 a month. And you get 22 podcasts a month, 5 a week. It's very condensed information. It's not stuff we cover on the shows or in written articles anywhere else. Because people pay for it. We believe that people pay for it. The information stays within that realm. And I know some people aren't happy about the fact we do this, but it's a full-time job. We put a lot of effort in. We have to spend a lot of time each day, Lisa and I, working on this. And we don't make a huge amount of money by any stretch of the imagination, but we want to build and grow it because we have ideas where we can expand in the future. And we want to make it kind of a more broader, all-encompassing kind of media style setup, similar to what Rogue Money's doing. And we will work with them and continue to work with them in the future, because when we all work together, we help each other. And that's the rationale behind it. And we're not trying to make millions out of it or do anything, and neither is Rogue Money in the process either. But we do need to pay bills, and we think it's a very reasonable price to charge compared to other competitors. And we thank the people who've already subscribed and continue to subscribe, because without them, there'll be no point doing this, because we realize, by them retaining their subscription, that they like what we do, and we get a lot of positive feedback. So we think it's worth doing, and the people who support us obviously agree.
Absolutely, and it's an honor and privilege to have you joining us, and want to thank you for joining on Rogue Mornings, helping to fill some big shoes with V being gone, and he will be back tomorrow. We do have a schedule lined up, a little bit of a change for today. We will not be able to have hanging with Harley today, as Harley is traveling and unavailable. We will be having a special release today, so. Yesterday I got laughed at by my son for saying the word talk bait. So I'm going to say it again, talk bait. There will be a release today. And then this afternoon, obviously at 4 o'clock, we will have Gus joining us to give us his perspective in only the way that Gus can with Cuss with Gus. So, Paul, thank you so much. And I want to thank our listeners as well. This is CJ and London Paul, and we are over and out.